try outpatient treatments to address their symptoms at home because they feared discrimination in the hospital over their vaccination status, because the treatments they wanted to try were not accessible to them through local physicians or pharmacies. Their symptoms continued to worsen at home. Finally, their children had no option but to bring them to Worcester Hospital for admittance. At the hospital, Dave and Angie continued to request alternate treatments that included in the standard hospital protocol. They were denied. Dave reluctantly consented to an emergency use hospital protocol medication with significant known risks because they refused all other options. His symptoms quickly worsened. The medicine caused increased problems with his lungs, so he was pushed into being ventilated and died 2 days later from lung damage. After Angie witnessed what her husband went through, she did not want to take the same path. Several days before Angie died, she called me for help from the Worcester City Hospital at approximately 10:45 p.m. She was mumbling that she needed help and wanted budesonide because her oxygen was plummeting. She had read studies about being successful for her condition. The doctor told her he was waiting until 11 p.m. to decide what to do about it. I immediately called the hospital to speak with Angie's nurse. The nurse I spoke with was cold and seemed uncaring. She said she would check with the doctor and get back with me. I ended up calling the nurse back to find out how soon the budesonide could be administered with the doctor's order. The nurse claimed the hospital did not have access to budesonide. I replied to her that I had just called 2 days prior to the in-house pharmacist and confirmed that they had plenty of it in stock in 2 different forms. Angie and I continued to plead with the staff for budesonide, and the nurse then stated that the medication could not be given to a BiPAP patient. I later came to find out this was absolutely untrue. A team of doctors came in and bullied Angie and her daughter, continuing to insist that their antiviral protocol and ventilation was the only option for Angie. Angie consented to the antiviral drug under duress, but she continued to refuse to consent to the ventilator. Angie's daughter Ariel told us her mom was then denied hydration and nutrition because it was not safe for her to receive nutrition unless ventilated. Angie and her children continued to beg staff for IV and nutrition fluids via whatever means they could without being intubated. She was denied. Ultimately, Angie's children had to painfully watch their mom succumb to effects of dehydration rather than the illness itself. Why is it okay to starve a patient to death to protect them from the possibility of aspiration? Why did my sister not have a right to decide what risk she was willing to take with her nutritional intake? Angie was punished to the point of death because she refused the interventions that the hospital approved of and was financially compensated for. Ohioans should have the ability to access any legal, FDA-approved medicines for any future seasonal pandemic or other illnesses or infection that may require a treatment that is not traditionally used for that purpose. Patients, like my sister, should also have the right to make medical choices that differ from hospital protocols without fear of being starved to death because of it. What happened to Dave and Angie should never be allowed to happen to anyone in this state again. Our family is still suffering the horrific aftermath of the deaths, and we pray for justice for the precious lives that we lost. This bill is too late to save my sister Angie and my brother-in-law Dave, but if passed, it can protect your sister, your brother-in-law, your mom, your dad, your child or grandchild by securing them access to treatments that could save their lives in the future. I urge the committee to vote yes on Ohio Bill 12. Thank you, Crystal Bowles.
Thank you for your emotional testimony, very powerful. Are there any questions of the committee? Well, thank you very much. Julie Smith? Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. Chairman Schmidt, Vice Chair Dieter, Ranking Member Samani, and members of the House Health Committee. Thank you for hearing my support testimony for HB12, the Jeff, Dave, and Angie Right to Try Act. Hello, my name is Julie Smith, and this is my daughter, Ella. My husband, Jeff, of 24 years, was killed by the COVID hospital protocols at UC Health Hospital in Westchester on September 25th, 2021. He was 51 with no pre-existing health conditions. From the moment Jeff entered the hospital, he was isolated from everyone and mocked for not getting the COVID vaccine. The doctors and nurses did not discuss any treatment options or the risk and side effects with Jeff or me. We never gave consent for remdesivir, it was just given. From the beginning, we asked for ivermectin, in which we were laughed at and told we should go ask a veterinarian. We also begged for vitamin C therapy, vitamin D, zinc, and budesonide. They were all denied because they were, quote, not part of the COVID protocol. The first time they tried to put my husband on a ventilator, his breathing was stable, but they came in and said they thought his lungs needed a rest for a few days and it was best to ventilate. He refused at the urging of a nurse who told him the outcomes from ventilators were not good. Because Jeff did not obey the doctor's orders, he was then starved, neglected, and withheld all fluids for 4 days. He was not on IV fluids and wasn't even allowed ice chips or mouth swabs to wet his mouth. Nothing. He was in agony. They left him alone for hours and hours on end. He would push his call light button and no one would come. With no one there to advocate for Jeff, the torment and abuse continued until they succeeded at getting him on a ventilator. Once vented, Jeff was tied to his bed and put on heavy paralytics and sedation. He began declining, so he continued to plead for alternate medications and vitamins, but all were denied because they weren't part of the hospital protocol. At one point, I had a doctor convinced to change Jeff's steroid to methylprednisone, as he agreed it was proven to penetrate the lungs better. It was switched for a few days before another doctor switched it back to dexamethasone because it was the only steroid they were allowed to use with COVID. Since the doctor said there wasn't anything else they could do for Jeff as a last act of hope, I hired lawyers for $7,000 to try and get Jeff ivermectin. A judge quickly agreed to the doctor's order, and the ivermectin was to start the next day. Once on ivermectin, Jeff was improving greatly. His oxygen needs went down from 80% to 50%. I then got word that the hospital was fighting the judge's ruling to have the ivermectin, and that I would have to pay another $7,000 if I wanted to fight for Jeff to keep getting it. A drug that was given a Nobel Prize and is one of the safest drugs ever created was so threatening to the hospital that they had to countersue me to make sure my husband could not have it. Why? I'd already signed a waiver. Was it because he was getting better? Because of this very public trial in which I had to testify to receive a potentially life-saving drug for my husband, my family and I were vilified all over the media and stalked and harassed in our home. The second judge ended up ruling in favor of the hospital, and the ivermectin was stopped immediately, even though it was helping Jeff. The doctors then decided to treat Jeff, and we finally had a glimmer of hope that he would maybe move to a rehabilitation center. But unfortunately, he had a throwing up incident, and so he was once again withheld food and IV fluids for another 4 days. I begged for IV fluids, but they were refused. Around this time, I noticed Jeff's urine looked cloudy and told a nurse who confirmed he had a UTI. I asked when they were going to start an antibiotic, but she said they weren't because infectious disease had already signed off on my husband to be released to a long-term care facility. The transfer never happened. My husband died a few weeks later, not from COVID, but from an untreated UTI and lack of nutrition. Devastated, I was left to try to answer my 9-year-old daughter when she asked me why the hospital took her daddy's medicine away and why they didn't want to help him get better. How do you answer a question like that? I'm here today because my oldest daughter said her dad's suffering should not be for nothing, and we need to help fight for others. We believe every Ohioan deserves all treatments available when they're fighting for their lives. The government and pharmaceutical companies should not be able to dictate which medications are lucrative enough to be given in the hospital setting, especially when the so-called protocols are not working and thousands of people are dying from the very protocols and medications they continue to administer. I heard code blue after code blue in the hospital daily and kept asking the doctors, if your protocols aren't working, why don't you want to try something different? They just kept saying there wasn't anything else they could do when we all know there was. Families in Ohio should not have to pay $14,000, go to court, and endure vicious cross-examination from a hospital lawyer just to even have a chance at receiving a safe, proven, and expensive drug to help their loved ones survive. I am just one voice out of thousands of Ohioans who lost a loved one. How many of them also could have been saved if hospital doctors and pharmacists had been allowed to prescribe and fill treatments that were saving other patients across the nation and the world? My husband suffered in the hospital for 72 days. He fought so hard, but in the end, he could not overcome the treatment and lack thereof from the hospital institution that we thought would help him. I will never recover from the horrors I witnessed in that hospital, and my kids are all still suffering terribly, even after thousands of dollars in therapy. Whatever future pandemic or illness may come, we must help protect other precious children from becoming fatherless due to the lack of access to medications, treatments, and nutrition. I urge the committee to please vote yes on HB12 to protect all Ohioans. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is this your daughter?
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to lose a daddy, isn't it? I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment. COVID really messed things up for so many of us. And the fact that we were not given full information at the time, the fact that things were being covered up, that the internet wouldn't allow certain protocols to come forward, that confused a lot of people as to what was right for them, should never happen again. And I pray that it doesn't. I'll open it up for questions. Representative Miller.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. And Julie and Ella, I want to thank you so much for coming. And I know you've been a part of many of these bills to bring honor to your husband and to your dad. And Ella, I would actually like to ask you a question because I know you've been a part of this process as well. I know that this bill or no legislation that we can potentially pass could bring your dad back, but from your perspective, and Mom, Julie, if you would want to answer as well, what would it mean to you, to your family, if House Bill 12 could become law?
I think it would definitely mean a lot to me because I don't want other people to have to go through like all of the suffering that I've had. I have depression, anxiety, PTSD, guilt, and fear of stepping into hospitals. And I've had that for almost 4 years. And the only reason I'm here right now is because of my mom. And she's like the strongest woman I know. And I don't want anyone else to have to live knowing the fact that their loved one could be saved and alive right now if they receive proper medication.
Yes.
And that's been the hardest part of all.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions for this witness? Ms. Representative Gross.
Thank you, Chair Schmidt. Thank you, friends, for being here. I apologize. Yeah. Could you take someone else?
It's an emotional day for all of us, Jennifer. It really is.
I'm sorry.
Are there any other questions? Wait.
I do.
Okay, got it, kid. I'm going to
Got
give you
it
a hug
together.
later.
When you were in the hospital, did you experience the staff making fun of you when you asked for treatments to save your husband's life?
All the time. We got laughed at, and we were told that if he would have got the vaccine, he wouldn't, we wouldn't be in this situation, so it was his fault. But yeah, we were laughed at and told they've never heard of vitamins and, that we should go see veterinarians. And it was just a continual mocking and just laughing at us for anything that we would suggest.
Questions for this witness? Thank you very much for your testimony. I will now call on Tom Renz. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, committee. Gotta be honest, that choked me up a little bit. That young woman reminded me of why 5 years later, I'm still fighting this. Y'all seen me down here more times than I can count. And unfortunately, we're still talking about medical free speech because our governor vetoed that. This body did its job. You stood up for free speech. Our governor didn't. I'm hoping he'll see the light this year, or that you'll override his veto. We got a bill in front of us that does three things that are very important to make sure that her daddy gets justice. This bill refocuses. We had someone that spoke on a previous bill who said something really important. A wonderful young lady, I'm sure she's working for the insurance industry. She talked about her position between we, the patients, and the doctors. When you go to your doctor, do you think that that doctor-patient relationship is the first and foremost thing that's happening? Because under our law, it isn't. Under our law, it isn't. That doctor is subject to the insurance companies, the payers. They're subject to the rules of the hospitals, the regulators, and everybody else. The decisions that you're given, the options that you're given as a patient, may be third or fourth on the rung of importance. This bill will help to correct that. This bill will help to recenter the doctor-patient relationship on the doctor-patient where it should be. Ultimately, I should have the right to decide. Her father should have had the right to decide what happens with his treatment. If there's ever been a my body, my choice argument, this is it. This is it. I don't know how anyone can oppose an individual's decision. We can debate on abortion. I'm pro-life, but there's a difference. There's another life involved. In this case, her father, there was no other life involved. There was no reason for him to be denied the treatment that he was choosing to pursue with his doctors, with his research, with whatever. It was his body, and it should have been his choice. But it wasn't, because the hospitals, the regulators, and the insurance companies were all more powerful and had more authority on the doctor-patient relationship than the patient. This bill provides liability for people who are on the periphery of that relationship, liability shields, pharmacists, hospitals, they're protected in this. They're actually receiving new liability shields, things that they don't have now, which is wonderful. Because they shouldn't be liable if they disagree with the decision. So I like that that's in this bill. But really, the other thing that this does is this creates the opportunity for science and innovation. I testified before the Senate committee last year on this bill, on the free speech aspects. And one of the things that I focused on there and will remind everybody of is science is never settled. And if it's settled, it's not science. Science is a growth process. I know because I interview and work with scientists every single day, and they all tell me the same thing, regardless of what they believe on any particular issue. The only people who ever tell me that science is settled when consensus is reached are people who are getting large grants to reach that consensus. Real scientists know that it's a growth process, and with COVID, it was quite the growth process. Early on, we saw, and by the way, the Trump administration has now launched an investigation into the medical journals to determine whether they're biased. The experts were receiving insane amounts of money on COVID, and they were doing things that were absurd. We have to trust the hospitals, right? Well, the hospitals knew that midazolam, I'm terrible with this word, it's a respiratory depressant. Why, when someone comes into the hospital, was so frequently across the country, a respiratory depressant given to someone with a respiratory disease? Why? It's going to depress their breathing, right? I know this, I've spoken to numerous experts on this. Depresses their breathing. What happens then? Oxygen goes down. What happens then? Forced air. Guess what the hospital gets for forced air? A bonus. A bonus. The hospitals received extra money for forced air. So they gave them a drug that made their breathing go down, that allowed them to justify forced air. Everybody knew this. Everybody knew what that drug does. Midazolam. I got it right here. Everybody knew that it did that, but they did it because no one was allowed to question the science. There were people who brought these things up. They were censored. Their licenses were attacked. Mary Tyler Bowden is very well known around the country for her fight. My friend, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, we've had to defend her license. Turns out though, that while some people communicate better in public about their perspectives on these things than others, they were all right. We now see studies showing, and we even see the federal government admitting that ivermectin and HCQ do have uses in COVID. You know, those things that her dad wanted.
30 seconds.
At the end of the day, this bill will allow and facilitate science and innovation. It will allow scientists, doctors, people who we trust with our lives to make a decision with patience between the doctor and the patient, to do the right thing for people, to ask questions so that the absurdity of COVID is never repeated. Ohio can lead in this. This bill is strong. I don't think there's anything quite like this anywhere in the country, and I look everywhere, I work everywhere. This is an incredible opportunity for Ohio to do the right thing. We have a mandate. Our voters, when they elected Donald Trump, also elected RFK. MAHA was a huge part of this, and it's very popular in Ohio. I'm asking for this body to do what it did last year, to continue to promote and support this. And I hope that if and when our governor decides to veto this, that we'll override it, because it should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness? Representative Gross?
Thank you, Chair Schmidt. Thank you, Attorney Renz, for being here. I'd like to ask you, in your legal opinion, is there any provision, does free speech, the free speech provision in this bill, or any provision of this bill, limit the prescriber from being liable for damage if the patient is harmed by the prescriber or the prescribing drug?
Explicitly, it does not. Explicitly. It quite clearly says prescriber is not immune from civil liability if harm comes due to recklessness and gross negligence. So that standard would survive. Speaking and sharing your scientific opinion should have no bearing on that. Now, if you mislead the patient, that would be something. But no, explicitly, this bill does not do that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of this witness? Thank you so much for your testimony. I will now call on Jeff Mitchell. Welcome, Dr. Mitchell.
Good morning. Thank you. I am. And a glutton. Chair Schmidt, Vice Chair Dieter, Ranking Member Samani, and members of the committee, thank you for having me here to testify today on behalf of House Bill 12, the Jeff, Dave, and Angie Right to Try bill. I'm here to testify for the proposition that the pharmacist must dispense medications prescribed. We seek the assurance that medications prescribed by the doctor will always be available to the patient. The pharmacist veto debated here today arose during the COVID pandemic. It is a relic left over from COVID. Proponents seek to uphold, clarify, and reinforce current law. In my more than 30 years of clinical practice, I never experienced a pharmacist refusing to fill a prescription prior to COVID. And just let that sink in for a minute. I saw something like 150,000 people in this state, and I never saw pharmacists refuse to fill my prescription. There's a deadly fiction that a pharmacist can practice medicine better than a physician. This has been implied by some here in the legislature. I'd like to direct your attention to two state laws. Ohio Revised Code 4731.41 is the law regulating the practice of medicine. Simply put, you have to have a license to practice medicine in the state of Ohio. This includes pharmacists. The filling of prescriptions by pharmacists is governed by the Ohio Administrative Code, Rule 4729, Section 5-5-16. That rule explicitly addresses the various rules and regulations for a pharmacist filling a prescription. There's no ambiguity there. It is the pharmacist's role to make minor modifications when filling a prescription. There's no right to change the drug. The pharmacist's modifications must remain within the physician's intent, and there is no right to refuse to fill under current law. There was a brief period of time where there literally was a ban on prescribing hydroxychloroquine in Ohio. Officially, it lasted less than 4 months. I've included that in the printed materials. I don't have time to cover that. But ultimately failed because it was rescinded on July 30th, 2020 by Governor DeWine. So during COVID, what happened was the shift in emphasis on outpatient treatment shifted from hydroxychloroquine then to ivermectin after Ohio went through this ban. And the FDA improperly adopted the authority for the pharmacist veto. And if you take away nothing else from this testimony, I'd like for you to understand that the entire basis for the pharmacist veto during COVID was to bolster the vaccines, because the vaccines were approved under an emergency use authorization, and that stipulated that there had to be no alternative treatments. And so that's why you had this incredible push to deny the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. The FDA proceeded to block ivermectin. They issued their famous "You are not a horse" insult to the American people. And ultimately, the FDA's practice of medicine was struck down by the 5th District Federal Court. And that was the Apter case. So at present, there is no state or federal law which allows the pharmacist veto. There's no need for legislation to promote a broken system, which is what we're looking at here. So the COVID treatment in the United States and the West ultimately failed dramatically. I've included two things in the packet of information. There's a diagram of Exhibit 2, which shows just how badly treatment failed in the United States. Simply put, the best available data in the world shows that the United States death rate was 4 times the rest of the world. And there's no disputing that. That comes from Hopkins and Oxford, and it's the best data we've used all the way through the pandemic. The other thing I included in that packet was in Exhibit 3, and it's the only thing I'm going to say about efficacy of treatment, and that's the Cleveland Clinic study. It's very simple. It's an elegant study. Simply put, the more vaccinations you get, the more likely you are to get infected with COVID. That's the absolute truth. That graph from the Cleveland Clinic shows that. This is what we call negative efficacy. I wanted to tell you about 4 experts I've run across just recently. Okay, and I'm not going to be able to do that, but one is Naomi Wolf. She's a 8-time New York Times bestseller, Rhodes Scholar, advisor to Presidents Gore and Clinton. She wrote this book on COVID. She switched sides more or less. So in healthcare during COVID, the pharmacist override was a failure. Do we want more unnecessary deaths? Go back to failed COVID policies like the pharmacist veto. Do you want to move forward from COVID? If so, replace what is broken, including the pharmacist veto. The overreach of the pharmacist was part of the treatment failure, and I'm asking you here today to return medical decisions to trained, experienced physicians and give patients the right to try. Please pass HB12. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of this witness? Yes, Mr. Barhorst.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Dr. Mitchell, thanks for your testimony. I just wanted to ask a question. I know some of the pharmacists are opponents of this bill potentially. Is there anything in the bill that they truly, in your opinion, should be worried about as far as a legal entanglement or just a conflict of interest? Or has that all been addressed with them throughout this process, in your opinion?
Right. Absolutely not. The HB12 simply upholds the Ohio laws present today and has been present for as long as we've had doctors and nurses and pharmacists in Ohio, really. There's nothing new that offers any increased liability. The pharmacists cite Section 5508 of the pharmacy bill, and it's about, quite frankly, it's just a law that doesn't apply. It's a law about controlled substances, and the whole second half of that bill is about, or that statute is about controlled substances. And sure, if a pharmacist fills a prescription for 400 OxyContin, they might have some liability. That's not even remotely close to the things we're asking for in this bill. This bill is about the filling of a prescription for an antimicrobial agent to treat an infectious disease. It really has nothing to do with that other section. And it's also governed by section 16 of that pharmacy regulation. If we had the time, it'd be profitable to go through that section line by line and actually see what a pharmacist is and is not permitted to modify a physician prescription. It's in that section.